50 member businesses and business people of the Tri-Cities Chamber of Commerce. I want to welcome all of you here tonight for our all candidates meeting. This is something that the Chamber takes a great deal of pride in doing. We, as many of you know, host all candidates meetings for every level of government. We've done it for a number of years. It's one of the ways that our membership engages with our political leaders, and it's one of the services that we like to do for the community. So again, thank you for coming. And one little plug, if any of you want or need any information about the Chamber of Commerce, we'd be happy to speak to you. I'm here, Rick Bassine, one of the current directors of the Chamber, and our Executive Director, Mike Hind, and Jordan Moe from the Chamber are all here, and Jimmy Ho. So come see any of us if we can help you out with any information about the Chamber. In accordance with our long-standing rules, our Chamber of Commerce all candidates meetings are moderated all candidates meetings, by which we mean that we ask people to write questions on cards, and Rick Bassine will collect them. He will moderate them, meaning he'll go through them and try to sort them out for clarity, relevance. We'd ask you, if you have a question, one of our strong urges, if you don't mind, please ask a question that can be directed to both candidates. So avoid the, gee, what do you think about red lights, pipelines, but something rather, what's your feeling about red lights, or what's your party feel about pipelines, so that we're not jabbing at particular candidates, because we will ask both candidates to comment on every question. The first few questions are presented by the Chamber of Commerce, so they'll have there'll be a particular interest to businesses, but of course this is an open meeting and we'd like everybody to ask whatever questions they wish. Please, nothing that's malicious or nothing that is incapable of being answered within a few minutes, and nothing obviously that's libelous or slanderous. But other than that, the meeting's for the most part in your capable hands. We're going to proceed with the 3-minute opening statements from the candidates. We've decided in order, Steve and then Selena, and then at the end of the meeting the closing statements will be done in the reverse order. Following the opening statements by the candidates, we'll have an opportunity to ask questions. We'll alternate between the two candidates as long as I can remember the order, because I'm getting old, and give them each an opportunity to answer each question. And again, if we run out of questions, then we can have a bit more of a free-for-all. But the deadline is that we're all going to be out of here no later than 9 o'clock, and conceivably sooner than that if we run out of questions. So without any further ado, if I can introduce Steve Kim, the candidate for the Liberal Party.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And I would like to thank Selena for being here, and I guess with Edward, hopefully he might come in pretty soon. I would like to thank the Tri-Cities Chamber of Commerce also for hosting this event. And I would like to thank every one of you for also being in the audience and being involved in the political process. Debt-free or debt-ridden? That is the question that's put forth to us. Our province is at a critical juncture in our history. And currently we're at a point where we have to make a choice on how we want to go forward. When I think about how the NDP has already allocated $3 billion in new spending and counting, the only question that I ask myself is, how are we going to pay for this? Today's BC Liberals have a plan. We have a plan with a vision to grow our economy, to create jobs, and to make life more affordable for all British Columbians, especially those living in Coquitlam and Maillardville. Now, I remember the 90s. It was 94 when I graduated from university and moved back to Coquitlam, and I couldn't find a job. None of my friends could at that point in time either. But fortunately, I had small business parents who allowed me to serve in their restaurant for some time. But after a year, I did have to leave Vancouver or Coquitlam at that point in time to go to Korea, and I decided to further my education and also look for other opportunities outside our province. And during that period, I remember the headlines. Businesses leaving the province, moving to Alberta, I also remember, professionals, doctors, and professors also leaving our province at that point in time. It was a lost decade. And when I think about where we are today, especially here in Coquitlam, I think about how we have a diverse, vibrant community of families and small business owners, and I can't help but think that we have a golden opportunity ahead of us. We are the hub of the Lower Mainland. We have invested a lot into our infrastructure, and we're poised for new opportunities moving into the future. And I firmly believe that the majority living in our area share in our values of small government, lower taxes, and growing our economy so that we can invest in future generations. Christy Clark and today's BC Liberals have a plan to cut red tape, to create jobs, and to continually grow our economy so that we can reinvest in our future. And that's the plan that I believe in as well, and I believe in a strong province and a Coquitlam Maillardville. Thank you.
I should mention for those of you in the back, Jimmy Ho at the front here is holding up cards with the time remaining in the allotment, so it's not the human teleprompter. He's just giving people some idea of what the past time is. Selena?
Thank you, Richard. I'd like to thank the Chamber for hosting us, and I'd also like to thank the NHL for not having a Canucks game scheduled for this evening. I had never intended to become a politician. It wasn't a life goal for me. I'm a family therapist, spending most of my career in the nonprofit sector and in private practice. Most recently, I worked for Share Family and Community Services as their Director of Development before being inspired to run for political office in 2008 when I became a Coquitlam City Councillor. I continue to be inspired by this community because of my experience as a family therapist, as a community volunteer, and as a local politician. We live in a fabulous community in a province that has so much potential. My work with the Coquitlam River Watersheds Roundtable, the Tri-Cities Chamber of Commerce, the Tri-Cities Homelessness and Housing Task Group, the Tri-Cities Oscar Night, the Tri-Cities Food Bank Challenge, and the Coquitlam Terry Fox Run all speak to the greatest resource we have in this community, the people who live here and the people who work here. I am so very proud of what we do in this community, of how we work together to make our lives richer, care for one another, and bring out the best in each other. I have been your representative on Coquitlam Council for 5 years. During that time, I have advocated for a better budgeting process, better accountability, and policies and actions that help us better meet our goals. I encourage a better budgeting process by tying our budget directly to our priorities, pushing our staff to identify possible budget reductions, and I've become known as the Queen of Performance Measures, demanding that we have real measures in place to determine if our activities are helping us reach our goals. I know that we need a prosperous economy, and I know that we need to ensure that we have a diverse economy. The financial planners in this room, if there are any of you here, all tell us that it's important to have diversity in our portfolio. It will make us more resilient, which is why the NDP are focusing on education and skills training for mining, forestry, film and high-tech industry, foreign credentialing, and yes, LNG. I also know that we're a caring society. We all work hard to ensure that our food bank shelves are full, but having a well-supported food bank in my community just isn't good enough. We need to address poverty in this community, and jobs are but one piece of that solution. We need to permit those on assistance to earn more money without the clawback so that they have the support they need to get back on their feet. And we certainly need to do a better job of caring for those who cannot fully participate in the economy. We also care about the environment. And if elected to government, the NDP are also going to finally ban the use of cosmetic pesticides and establish a Made in BC environmental assessment protocol, one that reflects our commitment to grow our economy while protecting the environment. I'm running for the New Democrats because their values and commitment on social justice, the environment, and the economy all resonate with my values. And I'm asking for your vote on May 14th because I also think they resonate with your values. Thank you.
Thank you, Selena. And for those of you that just came in, this is a moderated all candidates meeting, which means there's no microphone for the audience. Instead, just hold your hand up and one of our volunteers, Rick Pacine, will come around with a pen and a piece of paper and we'll sort the questions out and ask them as best we can. And if you've got any questions about the way the questions are handed up to me, it's completely his fault, so don't accost me in the parking lot like last time. So the first question for both candidates, and Selena, we'll start with you. It probably won't come as a great surprise to know that one of the key issues to our business community is transportation. The question is, do you support the current governance model of TransLink? And if not, what changes would you or your party advocate?
Well, we all know that TransLink is broken. We've certainly struggled with ways to finance our transit priorities. And so the NDP are committed to changing the structure of TransLink, making sure that there are elected officials part of the decision-making body. And we also know that our carbon tax revenues need to be directed to transit. Carbon tax revenues are supposed to help us reduce carbon, so they should be going to that direction and making sure that we have some ongoing funding for transit.
Well, certainly over the last few years, when I look at all the investments that we've had, especially in our transportation infrastructure, it's certainly a conversation that we've been working with as a province and also with the municipalities. But when we look at ways that we can also manage the structure of TransLink, it's something where a lot of it comes down to the best ways to find funding. And when I look at this situation, for me, it comes down, again, to looking at ways that we can continually grow our economy so that the funding is there and that every resident, regardless of where they are living, especially in areas where they might not have had some key infrastructure projects, have a say in this, and also that some of the investments can go down to reduce some of the costs that are associated with them.
Thanks, Steve. Next question, similarly on the transportation bend. The long-standing dispute between Coquitlam and New Westminster over the United Boulevard Braid Street connector, the Bailey Bridge, seems to have no resolution in sight. What plans or positions does your party have to help solve this dispute? Steve?
Well, I know that it's certainly a very important critical corridor between Coquitlam and New Westminster. Currently, from what I gather, it's also in the hands of New Westminster's at the city level on how they would look at the bridge. So from my point of view, it's something where we can have that dialogue and see what's the best way and what's the best benefit and value for the residents and for the businesses in Coquitlam.
Thank you. Yes, I'm all too familiar with the challenges of that intermunicipal road, also known as the Bailey Bridge. And I'm emphasizing intermunicipal because it is between and it links two municipalities which are having a hard time figuring out how to do this. So when we have an intermunicipal roadway, I think there is a role for the province to play. And I've actually already had some conversations with Judy Darcy, who is the NDP candidate in New West, telling her that after May 15th, I'm going to take a day off and ask if we can have a conversation. Maybe it's being presumptuous of me, but I think we need to start the conversation that the province needs to get involved, and we need to find a resolution to ease that traffic corridor. I'm not confident that the two municipalities, without some support from the province, are going to be able to resolve this.
Thank you, Selena. Next question, Selena, we'll start with you. What does an age-friendly community mean to you?
Oh, I had this question today on the doorstep. This is great. For me, it means making sure that we have a variety of housing forms for people to live in. One of the challenges we have in Coquitlam is we are heavy on single family. And so as people age, they can't take care of their house. They need to be able to downsize and still stay in the same neighborhood. So we have to, at the municipal level, they have to be addressing that. At the provincial level, it also means that they have access to the kinds of services that they need in their neighborhoods. So one of the things that our government is planning to do is to make sure that we have home care. So as people age, they can stay in their homes longer. They can get the needs that their needs can be met without having to leave the community that they live in.
Steve?
For me, for age-friendly community, I look at it in the sense that we have various generations, especially living here in Coquitlam. And even for myself, where I have 3 generations of my family living in this area, it's one where we have to have a very inclusive approach, a very balanced approach, so that we understand the needs of everyone. We do have an aging population, and we have a lot of families here who have to deal with the needs of their children, in addition to their parents who are also aging as well. So it's about having the right type of accessibility, also having the right planning process that's responsible and balanced to the needs of all people in Coquitlam as well.
Thank you. I feel like I'm very close to you two here. The next question from the audience. Both of your parties have actively solicited city councillors to run under their banner. This could bring costs in excess of $150,000 to municipalities for by-elections. If elected, would you support your party reimbursing the cities for these costs? Selena?
That's an interesting question. I hadn't thought about that. I think there's a real challenge when you're looking for the best person to run, and you have a disconnect with when different elections are. My experience is that, having had local government experience, is that I think I actually am the best candidate to represent you provincially. I think one of the things we need to look at is how we're governed. So the Local Government Act actually dictates whether or not you need to have a by-election. And I think that one of the things we need to take a look at is how do we explore that so that we don't burden communities with the costs of by-elections. So at this point, I think that's something that we need to have a conversation about.
For myself as a new candidate, it's something where I've come in to take the ability to have this opportunity to serve the community of Coquitlam Maillardville. And when I look at it from the sense of if people do win and there is a need for a by-election, there are also a lot of candidates who have been taken out of, or who have pursued this, who are also sitting at the municipal level. So from the stance of would the party reimburse at this point in time, I think if those types of funds were available, it might be worth having a conversation. But at the same time, we're always looking for the best people to represent each riding.
Thank you. Next question is from the Chamber of Commerce. If elected, what steps would your government take to protect the over 1 million jobs created in this province by small businesses, enabling the businesses to remain viable without reducing the workforce? Steve?
Well, as a small business person, and also from a line of small business people, it's something very important to me. As we all know, in BC and across Canada, 98% of our economy is based on small business. We also have 55% of our exports in BC driven by the small business sector. So this is a very important aspect for me in those 1 million jobs, because our party is looking to cut the red tape so that small business owners have a stronger ability to make the decisions for their business and the best way to grow it. We're also looking to lower the tax for small business owners by 40% from 2.5 down to 1.56 or 1.6%. So this gives the opportunity for small business owners to also create the jobs and also grow the economy and have a major impact on the provincial economy as well.
Thank you. As a small business person whose husband also has a small business and who also comes from a line of small business, it is really important that we have the flexibility that we need to adapt. So we're going to look at providing stability and certainty with no HST-like surprises. We think it's important to increase the number of skilled workers. We also are going to be looking at initiatives to support high-tech companies, tourism, as well as film, TV, and digital media industries. We're going to be looking at a buy local program, because we know that when we can keep money in local communities, it filters through much better. And I think that's really important to help our small businesses.
Thank you, Selena. The next question, and Selena, we'll start with you, relates to the Riverview property. What steps are you prepared to take if you're elected to protect the Riverview lands, and what role do you see the lands playing in our community in the future?
Well, this one is pretty important to a lot of people here in this community. Riverview is 244 acres of what some might consider prime real estate, but it also has historical buildings, historical arboretum, and has a pastoral setting that in some ways has such potential for generating economic viability in our community. The NDP's position is to keep it in public lands and keep it whole. But we also need to have a plan for how to manage those lands, what the future looks like. And I know that the Riverview Task Force, I've been the vice chair of that task force, has explored in many different ways opportunities for it. And I think that we need to work together, all three levels of government actually need to work together to identify how to best use those lands so that they can generate, they can contribute to the local economy, they can generate jobs, as well as remain whole in that pastoral-like setting.
I grew up next to Riverview Hospital in Meadowbrook, and we still have a home right next to it. So it has it had a pretty big impact in my life growing up, and where we would always be very close by and going for walks. And when I think about Riverview, it is a historic, a landmark, and a very important green space for our community. So when I think about our province or the government in itself, who has also invested in some of the facilities, such as the Cypress Lodge, it is something where I see that we can have a balanced approach on how we work and develop, if at all, with the Riverview lands. Because I do know it also provides a very strong respite for those in regards to mental health. And to me, when you have that kind of green space, it's very important. Now, in regards to any type of future development, if that was even put on the table, for that it would have to take a very balanced approach because, again, the green space in our community is always very important.
Thank you, Steve. Next question from the audience. How will you, working with the government, act toward real alleviation of family and child poverty in BC? Steve, to you first.
This is, it's an important question, and coming from, a situation where I look at my parents who came here with less than a few bucks in their pocket for the opportunity that was given to them in Canada, especially here in the province of BC, is something where I see having that opportunity to go out and get a job, and then that further opportunity as an entrepreneur to start a business becomes very important. So when I see about the ability for us to continually grow our economy, it allows us to create a shift, I believe, in some form of generational income increase that can spill over into future generations for that family. So when I think about this situation, it's about, again, having a strong economy so that everyone can participate at their fullest and help to create more jobs and better paying jobs for themselves.
Selena?
Can you repeat the question, Bill?
I sure can, yep. How will you, working with the government, act towards real alleviation of family and child poverty in BC?
Thank you. So as somebody who spent the better part of her career working for Share Family and Community Services, I've had firsthand knowledge of the impact of poverty on families. And a lot of times it's not for lack of jobs. It's often lack of education, lack of opportunity, and difficulty just making ends meet. So I'm actually quite proud of the kinds of things that we're talking about at the NDP. We want to raise household incomes for low and moderate income families with children by investing $210 million a year in the BC Family Bonus Program so that families receive an extra $100, $200 in their pockets. We're going to introduce a legislated poverty reduction strategy, something we've been calling on for a very long time. We have the second highest child poverty rate in the country, and we don't even have a strategy for how to reduce it. Jobs are one piece of it, but what about those folks who cannot participate fully in the economy? We want to tie all income assistance rates to inflation. We also recognize that the clawbacks that the current government provides when people do get some assistance, when they are able to earn a bit of money, doesn't get them any further ahead. If we stopped the clawbacks, people could get a little further ahead, maybe take a course or two, so that they can then access the economy in ways that it's just not available to them. We need to start giving people a hand up and enough with the hand out. The food bank is a hand out, and I would love to see this community no longer need the food bank.
Thank you. The next question, I believe from the audience, relates to natural resources. Abundant natural resources are one of the biggest strengths of our province. Businesses in these industries employ tens of thousands of people in high-paying positions. Much debate has arisen about the role that the extraction of resources or the movement of resources from other jurisdictions should play in the provincial economy and job creation, with parties appearing to be completely in favor or completely opposed to utilization of our natural resources as a job driver. The question is, what actions will your party take to create jobs in the province, either through utilization or movement of natural resources or other means in lieu of this option? Selena?
Thank you. You're very good at remembering this, Richard. I'm most impressed. An NDP government is prepared to invest in healthy forests and a strong land base. We need to double the seedlings planted by government on Crown land to 50 million a year and update our resource inventories. We also need to stop exporting raw logs. That's an opportunity for jobs right here in this province. We also need a Grow BC focus. We need to help our orchardists with replanting and other input costs. We also need to create a stable market for local growers. So we want to use the land base to strengthen our resource economy. We want to support mines, make them a quicker turnaround rate for them to get their permits. We also promote and support sustainable LNG development. So we are looking at a very broad-based use of our land resources.
Well, responsible practices. And right now we know that BC is a resource economy, and we do have, where we're situated as a gateway, that our neighbors to the east also want to use our lands to move some of their product as well. But with that being said, the BC Liberal government has stated that we would put out 5 conditions in order for such projects to move forward. They're based on 3 of them, environmental. One is also on the First Nation and the rights, and also on the benefit that would have to our province. And this goes across the board. It's consistent, not only for the pipeline where they would move, but also for future projects that would happen, such as the refinery as well. And we know that mining is very important. And over the last few years, we've been also looking for new markets that we can also export our resources, and lessening that dependency on the US. And we've been focused on growing that relationship with the Asia Pacific countries, and also increasing the number and the volume, and also the amount of trade investment that happens between our country and also with that of the Asia Pacific. The trade missions that have been put forth have had some results, very strong results, and I firmly believe as we continue, this is the market for the future.
Thank you, Steve. The next question from the audience relates to the question of the sale of government property and assets. How do you feel about plans to sell off government property and assets, and how would you prioritize between any assets that are proposed to be sold off? Steve?
Well, it's certainly one of those things where if there's a piece of land that the government holds and it's not usable for our purposes, then we have to take that stance and look at it, what's viable in the best interest of the government. For instance, in Surrey, we were looking to build a new hospital, but rather we looked to enhance Surrey Memorial Hospital instead. So there was a piece of land that we had, and decided that what's best for the province, rather than the government hold it, decided to put it up and be part of the asset sale. So it's about prioritizing the needs of what is actually meaningful and valuable for the province that has some return, and as opposed to, can we sell them so that, for instance, even the private sector might have a better way to deal with those pieces of land.
So, having spent 5 years in municipal government, one of the no-nos of budgeting is to use your land to manage to fill a hole in your operating budget. you have that land once, you sell it once, only once. And so next year you cannot sell that land again to manage your operating budget. In municipal government, we're very, very careful. Our land base is our land base. And yes, we might sell a piece of land over here, but that money goes back into our land bank because we might need to build a park or we might need to build something else later and buy some land. Land stays with land and operating is operating. And I think it's actually very dangerous because you run the risk of having a structural deficit when you mix the two. So I'm actually very concerned about this current government's plan to sell off lands in order to manage an operating budget. I think because there will be future hospitals, there will be future schools, there will be future demands, future courthouses, whatever it is that they need to build, you will always need land. So I have real concerns about the direction that the Liberal government is moving in terms of making that happen.
Thank you. And I'm told I haven't been speaking loud enough, so my apologies to everyone in the back. My timid way will be no more. For both candidates from the floor, a question that won't surprise you regarding the reintroduction of the PST and its effect on business. The question is, how does your party plan to offset the negative impact of the reintroduction of the PST, particularly as it relates to business? Selena?
Well, I think that we got into this mess in the first place because of the surprise HST introduction. And I think if the Liberals had been honest from the get-go in 2009 when they introduced this, we wouldn't be in this mess. So at this point, I hold them responsible for getting us here. This is how, and then they sent it off to referendum. So this is what the direction that they started us here, and we've landed here because of their direction.
Steve?
Well, I think when we look back at the HST, I think we're all in a pretty much agreement that the approach and how it was done was not in the best light. As a small business owner myself, I know this also had an effect on me. But at the same time, when Christy Clark came into power as a premier, she put it out to the people of the province and with the referendum and made a decisive decision that once the people have spoken, that she would push forward with the results, which she has done. And when I look back to now, over the last little while, how we switched back after following the will of the people, we were looking at the PST, and we've done it in a way where it's a little bit more modern because the previous PST was extremely archaic. So it's a much better tax system than it was when we had the GST PST.
Thank you. And from the audience, a question beginning with you, Steve, to both candidates. If your party forms the government, what would your party do specifically to create employment and bring skilled workers to BC?
Well, I think a lot of that has to do with the vision and how we want to grow the economy. When I think about this opportunity that we have with the LNG, in addition to other types of industries that would also have some spillover effect, I think we have an opportunity to create a lot of job opportunities and to bring and to have that import of skilled workers come to our province. And that would be over the long term. When I look at those opportunities, and I think the numbers are in a roughly net 100,000 new jobs that we would have over the next 15 years, we are in a strong position to be a skilled worker importer rather than exporter.
Selena?
Well, I'd actually like to see my children be some of those skilled workers, frankly. Right now, we have a real challenge for our young people to access the skills training and education that they need. The average young person has a student debt of $27,000. And that's huge when you are just starting out in your life, and 6 months after graduation, you have to start paying back that debt. So our government, should we form government, we would be prepared to invest in our children and in our young people so that they have access to those jobs, because they need the skills of the future. They need to be able to participate in the economy, and the best way to do that is with education and skills training. And so by having a needs-based grant available to them so that they can pay for school, get the help that they need to get the educations they need for the jobs of the future, they can stay in this province.
Thank you. The next question from the audience, Selena, we'll start with you. How would you improve access to healthcare, emergency services, and diagnostic equipment?
Okay. Well, so as I think about healthcare, we know that it absorbs a huge amount of our resources. It's very expensive, and as we age, we of course need a little bit more help in the medical, from the medical field. So we need to start thinking about how we deliver medical services. Right now, I just had a friend actually who had a stroke 2 weeks ago, and he spent 5 days in Emerge. 5 days, half dressed, people milling about. It was really hard to watch. And the reason why they couldn't find a bed for him is because someone who has another chronic illness or a senior who maybe could be cared for in their home but doesn't have the resources, doesn't have the home support, is taking up a hospital bed. We need to start thinking differently about how we deliver healthcare services. We need to find and we need to have the resources so that people could stay at home. We need more home care so that they can manage their chronic illnesses, so that they can get the nursing support they need at home, so that they're not in our hospital beds. Our hospital beds are for acute care. They're for people like my friend who had a stroke, so that they can get the care that they need there. It's also very expensive in hospital. It'll be cheaper for us if people can stay at home longer. So that's one of the things that we're prepared to do.
Steve?
Well, healthcare is definitely a very important issue. Since 2001, we've doubled the amount of funding to healthcare to over $16 billion. Currently, it takes roughly just over 40% of our budget is also on healthcare. And we know that our population is growing in the sense of the boomers. So healthcare is going to continually be an increasing challenge for our province. And with that being said, we're at a point where we have to really think about what is the innovative way that we can continually support and fund our healthcare moving forward, to continually put more resources to it. And at this point in time, when I look at it, we're looking for different ways that we can generate revenue for our province so that we can have that funding for our healthcare, among other programs. So to me, I have to bring it back to our economy, and for us to find ways that we can create this revenue, not only for the families living in this province, but for our government, so that we can continually put more money into healthcare.
Thank you, Steve. Next question from the floor, and we'll start with you, Steve. Will your government keep the promise to improve primary health care with more multidisciplinary teams and not-for-profit clinics, enabling nurses to work to their full scope of practice, provide nurse practitioners with more opportunities to fully utilize their skills, and elevate overcrowded emergency rooms?
So, I think at this point, I do have to bring it back in the sense that we are putting a lot of our funding into healthcare at all levels. And the ability for us as a government, if we're elected for another 4 years, is to continue to review and modify the programs that we have and see what's the best use of them and how to support the community with the most value. So moving forward, to continually reinvest, we would have to find new ways and to ensure that the money is there for our nurses and those that they work with in our community.
Selena?
So I just came across a number in some of my notes. According to the BC Ministry of Health, 370,000 patients in acute care could have used an alternative level of care in 2010. That's a lot of money that would be better spent elsewhere. And so we are committed to improving access to those multidisciplinary health clinics that would include nurse practitioners, rehab professionals, psychologists, social workers, midwives, and other health professionals.
Those were two excellent answers. Next question, there's a bit of a long preamble here, so please bear with me. The NDP has proposed to increase K-12 funding by $265 million to hire new teachers, counselors, education assistants, and librarians at a time when provincial government debt has reached a new historic high of $45 billion. While the BC Liberals, as part of their balanced budget plan, have announced a new budget that freezes block funding to school districts at $4.7 billion for the second straight year, as school boards grapple with higher utility bills, medical service plan hikes, and pension fund increases. Here in the Tri-Cities, our school district is making drastic cuts to eliminate a projected $12 million deficit. A closer look at the school district's books reflects a long-term systemic problem that neither party seems to address. The percentage of management, administration, and teaching labor costs in many school districts as a percentage of the overall budget has risen to the point whereby budgets are severely strained, impacting programs, supports, maintenance, and supplies. The burden of offsetting these reductions is being downloaded to parents, leading to an inequitable distribution of resources depending on parent income levels amongst schools in a school district. The question: what is your party's long-term solution to address the crippling effects these high labor costs are having on our school district budgets? Steve?
Well, education is very important, and of course as a product of the public school system here in Coquitlam. It certainly rings home to me as well. I do know currently, we look at our education system. We do have a world-class system here in our province, and I certainly know that there have been, and I've mentioned this a few times, quite a few teachers who have instilled some strong values in me and made an impact as role models growing up. But I also look at the fact that in BC, funding per student adjusted to inflation is at its highest levels in the history of this province. And I know that we always want to do more, and that is something where we have to look at what's the best way that we can manage our budgets. To me, it comes back to the fact that we have to have a strong economy so that we can create those funds and reinvest in the programs that are really important for the future, such as education. And currently right now, as much as we would love to put more money into various programs, we always have to ask ourselves how. And if we don't have that money, then we have to look at new ways to create revenue, especially those in the future, that can add that benefit to everyone in our community, especially regarding healthcare. I'm sorry, education.
So what I worry about is it's sort of a cart and the horse sort of challenge, is that if we don't invest in education, there will be no economy, there will be no jobs, there will be nobody creating it, because they won't be educated in order to drive the economy. So it is one of the places where we cannot afford to continue to do this to our children. We need to make sure we invest in education. We have a fabulous education system, and it's been under terrible stress for 12 years with the downloading of costs and lack of resources. So a key priority for our government will be to improve learning conditions for all children. And to do this, we do need to invest $100 million annually to hire the teachers that we need so that those children can participate and drive the economy. We cannot skimp on our children. It's just too dangerous.
Thank you, Selena. Next question from the audience regarding LNG. It has been acknowledged that the proposed LNG projects will require significant power to operate. What is your position on Site C? And if you oppose it, how do you propose to power the new LNG facilities? Selena?
This is the one question I hate. Only because it's one of those areas where we still need to do we still need a lot of information. We need to make sure that from a fracking, the perspective on fracking is that we're doing it in a way that's sensitive to the environment. We need to make sure that with Site C that we have the information we need to make a good decision about the full impact that would have, because we can't trade off one for the other. We can't compromise good agricultural land in order to generate energy that's going to drive something else. Everyone's going to be impacted. And so those are some of the really difficult challenges, and I think we need to get more information.
Steve?
When I look at, as I would say with most British Columbians, that we all believe in a balanced approach. And having a responsible government that takes that approach to ensure that any type of capital projects take into consideration all the different elements that go into making it a viable project. And when I look at the needs for LNG and with Site C, it's certainly the power source that is also required to help not only the communities there, but also for the LNG projects. But at the same time, it's about having that balanced approach so that all it needs, and making sure that our environment is taken care of, not for us just today, but for future generations as well.
Thank you. A question on post-secondary education. Steve, we'll start with you. On February 28, 2012, the presidents of 25 provincial post-secondary schools, including those at UBC, SFU, Douglas College, and BCIT, wrote a letter to the Advanced Education Minister expressing concern over $70 million in cuts slated to come into effect between 2013 and 2015 to institutional grants that, combined with unfunded inflationary pressures, have placed an inordinate strain on the operations of these institutions, leading to cuts in services and programs. This at a time when the province faces a skills shortage in 2016. The question is, how does your party plan to adequately fund post-secondary institutions and address the looming skills shortage? Steve?
Well, I think for this one in particular, it's always very tough. I know that with the post-secondary education institutes that we have in the province, we've been working to get more of them out there, especially when we look at the campus that we have for UBC in the Okanagan. Also working to get various colleges to also offer university programs, post-secondary education, and have a strong post-secondary education institutions in our province is a key driver to our future. And when we look at various funding and what we can do, it comes down to how can we all afford to and put more funding into this. And right now we're at a point where we have to make some tough decisions, and we're looking at what's the best alternate option for us moving forward. And it has to be to create more revenue with the systems that we have, in the sense of growing our economy. And I don't want to sound like a broken record here, but the fact is we're at a point where since 2008, we've come out of a big recession on a global scale, and it affected everyone around the world. And BC came out pretty strong. We weren't immune. I know it means were we immune. However, we came out better than other areas, yet we're still feeling the effects. And the best way for us to continue to progress is that we have to look for new ways to reinvest in our province. And then we can also look at ways that we can continually look to increase funding and to ensure that we don't have these shortfalls. But we have to find these ways continually to build our economy so that we have these options and the benefits available to us. Thank you.
Selena?
Well, we recognize that about 80% of the jobs of tomorrow will require some sort of education or skills training. So we know that it's important that we invest in that future. We know that it's important that we invest in our children and in our young people. So that's why education and skills training is such a key component of our platform. And we're committed to a $100 million needs-based student grant program that will be paid for by reinstating a capital tax on the banks. Because we know that when our children are well educated and that when our young people can access the economy, that they're the ones who are going to bring us full circle and help enrich this province.
Thank you. Next question from the audience, Selena, we'll start with you. It relates to Medicare. The cost of medications in BC is rising every year. How will your government keep these costs down, especially for seniors and people with low to moderate incomes?
Well, first of all, we're prepared to restore the Therapeutic Initiative's role as the drug watchdog and make expertise available to the private drug plans, clinicians, and consumers so that we can make better decisions. We also want to expand the province-wide academic detailing to ensure prescribers are informed about the most appropriate drugs to use and provide physicians with timely expert feedback on their prescribing patterns and trends. And we do need to expand our low-cost drug program. We know that that's part of a challenge for many who have limited incomes.
Steve?
I think, over the last little while, we've also been looking at ways to lower some of the drugs in the prescription side of it, with not those branded drugs, but the ones that come in that are more generic, so that everyone has the ability to, we realize how high cost they can be. They have the ability to pay for them on a regular basis. Now, it's a very important issue for us to have the ability and to have the funds without going into the ability to raise taxes, and so that we can pay for this. We're just looking for ways that we can all work together and have an innovative approach, because this issue is going to continually compound over the next little while.
Thanks. I have to say, with just 2 candidates in this speed dating approach, you really don't get much time to think. I'm impressed that you can answer the questions at all. From the audience, Steve, we'll start with you. Both parties have been accused of enacting policies in the past that have given rise to higher debt levels. Why would this time be different?
This time, it will be different because we have a plan. Over the last little while, since 2008, and again, we've gone through some pretty tough times on a global scale. And when I look at where we are, especially over the past 2 years when the Premier first came on, we worked to control spending. And now we're at a point where we have a balanced budget. So when I look at the debt, I also have to look at it in a way that's a little bit more of a meaningful metric. And rather than looking at the total amount, we have to look at it in terms of a debt to GDP ratio. And currently we're sitting at 18.2%, which is still very low in comparison to other jurisdictions. In the States, I believe it's upwards almost in the 60 to 70% to GDP. But we are one of the lower provinces debt to GDP ratio in the province. So back in the 90s, when we look at it, the government at that point in time could not get it lower than 21.8% to GDP, and yet it was on an increasing scale. Right now, we've just come through one of the worst recessions, and yet we're still doing strong, and now we have a balanced approach so that we can work to eliminate our debt over time.
Selena?
Thank you. So the Liberals claim that they are fiscally conservative debt and deficit fighters, and that they will balance the budget and eliminate the debt. But they have run 5 deficits in a row. And in the 2 years since Christy Clark became Premier, she added a record $11 billion to BC's debt, and their budget plan for the next 3 years will add another $13 billion. So the NDP plan does not add any debt beyond what they've already committed to. And our plan is fully costed. And so we are saying that we will increase spending by 1%, and we have identified a new dollar of revenue for every single new dollar that we're prepared to spend. And so the significant difference between our 2 plans is that we will shift priorities somewhat, focus on the fundamentals that will provide a strong base that will help to improve our economy, things like skills training and education, supporting small local businesses, and supporting growth in the high-tech and creative industries.
Thank you. Next question, a taxation question. Selena, we'll start with you. It relates to a corporate capital tax.
Oh, yeah, the hard ones.
One of the issues up for discussion in this election is the introduction of a corporate capital tax to banks and credit unions. And while this might appear to receive a positive response given the public outcry over bank executive salaries, the financial impact on credit unions in the province could be significant. The 2010 budget brought in 100% deposit guarantees for provincial credit unions, allowing them to compete more readily against the big banks. This said, many of the remaining 60 credit unions in the province will see this new tax erode profits that are paid as dividends to members or invested back into our communities by over 20%. The impact will reduce community contributions, dividends to members, and in some cases may place the credit union and its employees in financial jeopardy, causing a run on funds and calls for the province to set forward in support of their deposit guarantee. The question is, what steps would your government take to protect these important well-paying jobs, as well as the millions of dollars that these companies inject into our communities every year?
How come I get all the difficult questions first? Okay, so while so banks will be paying 3%, and while financial institutions with headquarters in BC, including credit unions, will only be paying 1%, and that those credit unions with capital holdings of less than $20 million will be exempt. So that's most of our credit unions in our province. So So in that respect, where it's not going to be as hard a hit on those credit unions.
Steve?
Well, our government, we're not looking to have those capital corporate taxes. But one thing I do know, as a credit union member myself, it's one of those things where with these taxes, eventually they're just going to be passed on down to the consumer. So in one way or another, they're just still going to take a bite out of our wallet. I know that it is great to receive the dividends as a member, and when those go down, it certainly has effect on myself, and I'm sure all the members of credit unions that this is affecting.
Thank you. Question about ethics. So Adrian Dix got caught without a ticket on SkyTrain. Christy Clark ran a red light with her son in the car. Both leaders have apologized. How important to you is character and ethics in this campaign? And how does that relate to you as a candidate seeking our vote? Steve?
Well, ethics are very important. But we also have to understand that people are people, and people also make mistakes. I know it's easy because we're in Vancouver or the Lower Mainland, and we have the Canucks. And sorry to bring them up, but we have a way to think of perfection, and when we don't hit perfection, we do get upset. And when I think about the people, especially when you're under a microscope, and I'm sure everyone makes mistakes, it's the character of the person on how they own up to it and how they make amends. When I think about myself, I've prided myself on the values that my parents and my friends and teachers in my community have placed in me, and have been a very strong proponent of having moral values and having an ethical perspective on the way of life. Especially when I'm dealing with my community groups, and the fact that I work with a lot of youth. We still have a camp that we hold every year at Camp Howdy in Belcara, where we have 100 children aged 7 to 16 come for 4 days in August. And the ability for us to mentor and showcase and to also provide those ethics back to future generations is always very important for me.
Thank you. Selena?
Thank you. Well, when I told my mother that I was going to run, she said, "Oh no, they're going to say bad things about you." And that broke my heart, not because there's bad things to say, because there are no bad things to say, but that her perception was that if you step out into public life, you become this object of derision and this object to be brought down, cut off at the knees, and to be mocked and to be shamed. And when I considered running and had conversations with Adrian Dix, I said to him, what are you going to do as leader to ensure that I have a harassment-free workplace? Because in no other place in this province would we tolerate the kind of bullying and disrespectful behavior that we see in the legislature, and certainly even in this election. We just wouldn't tolerate it. And he said, "Selena, we are going to run a positive campaign. We are not going to participate in those sorts of mudslinging activities. We are going to tell people what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, and how we're going to pay for it before we get elected. We are not going to participate." And let me tell you, there have been times when it has been hard to do. But we have committed, and I have committed, to not participate in that, because it brings us all down. It brings the level of debate down. It brings the level of government down, the level of leadership down. We need to start having different kinds of dialogues so that we can bring out the best in each other, the best policies, so we can have the best province.
Thank you. So back to transportation. Selena, we'll start with you. What's your position on road pricing and tolls on both current and new bridges and roadways?
Well, it's one of those things where I think we all struggle. We all want to get to where we're going to go without anybody else on the road. We just want to get there. But we all have to pay for that somehow. And I think, and I appreciate, I know the Mayor's Caucus was meeting today, and it was part of their discussion was how are we going to do this, certainly in Lower Mainland. I think we might need to do a little bit of all of it, actually, because nobody wants to touch it. We don't want property tax to pay for it, we don't want road pricing, we don't want tolls. Everyone wants it, no one wants to pay for it. And we may need to start taking a look at, you know, how do we do this? And we may have to just sort of suck it up, but it may be a little bit of everything. But that's a conversation that we need to have, all levels of government, and a broad-based conversation.
Well, we certainly know that we need world-class infrastructure for our province, and especially here in the Tri-Cities area. And you know, when we look at various ways to create these huge capital projects, there is that burden that everyone also has to face. And right now, it's also a question about what is the best way to measure this. Prior to, I'll throw out there the Portman Bridge, we know that traffic congestion was just unbearable. So it also became a matter of time, and also the amount of money that you were saving at the gas pumps, sitting there idle on the freeway. So there is that kind of cost benefit that we have to look at there as well, that comes into play. But also, when I look at the BC Liberal Plan, when I look at our ability with the Prosperity Fund, we do have it noted that we would also look to reduce the burden from these capital projects, such as the Portman and the tolls. So we do have something in place where we can reduce this and ensure that our citizens can also start to travel more freely.
Thanks, Steve. From the audience, and Steve, we'll start with you. How would you balance revenue needs with income from Crown corporations? Specifically, what legislation would you enact to eliminate deferral accounts?
Me personally?
if you were king, Steve.
Yes. Yes. Edward, do you have an answer?
I gotta concede that's a really hard question. Sure.
Could you repeat that question?
Yeah, happy to. How would you balance revenue needs with income from Crown corporations? Specifically, what legislation would you enact to eliminate deferral accounts? We should give you all the right to pass on one if you like.
Well, I guess. Well, let's see here. As much as I would love to answer this right now, I do have to admit, quite frankly, I need more information and for me to give a proper answer. And if I was to, if whoever asked the question, maybe on May 15th, and I'm on my way to Victoria, we can have that chat on the ferry. So, but please get back in touch with me.
Well, I'm a little bit in Steve's camp here, but I do think that the BC's Auditor General has a role to play here around that we need to do a better job of as government. Government has a responsibility to be open and honest with where money is and where money's coming from and where it's going. And so making sure that we have that transparency is critical. And I would turn to the Auditor General and say, so what do you recommend we do? What is the best way to do this? So that's what I would do. Thanks.
Well, here's one that's well, actually, I shouldn't say that. It's easier to read.
You've got the easiest job here tonight, you know, Richard.
Selena, if you don't agree with the majority, and I assume this means the majority of your caucus, are you willing to vote against it, or will you be going along with the rest of the group? And can you give an example of how that approach has come up in your career to date?
This is one that I think, so let me tell you about being an independent on council. because I am independent on council. I ran as an independent, and it's really nice and easier because you get to say, this is it. This is, you know, me and what I'm thinking and what I'd like to do. What's frustrating about being an independent is that even though I said I would do this, I would do whatever this was, like, let's say, banning the use of cosmetic pesticides, it took me 3 long years because I couldn't get enough votes on council. And I'd let my constituents down. And so that is one of the downsides of being an independent, is you can't actually get done the stuff that you want done. So one of the decisions that I made, the commitments I made, is if I'm going to run as a party, then I'm running in the party. And for those of you who've been paying attention on council, I do speak my mind. And there is a place to do that on caucus and to influence my colleagues and to get them to see it my way, and I will be tenacious. And they don't know how tenacious I can be, but I can be a little bit relentless until I can get enough of them to see my way, and then we will act in accordance as a caucus.
Steve?
Well, I would think that, you know, I was about to throw out a joke there, but what it comes down to is teamwork. And when you're on a team, there are times where you do have to act as part of the whole collective. And, you know, so, you know, I understand what Selena was saying in the sense that you do have to work hard, but at the same time understand that sometimes the needs can be a little bit bigger and you have to see the forest through the trees. But at the same time, it is very important about fighting for that voice at the table. Throughout my career, I've worked to, as some would call it, break down some of the glass ceilings or the bamboo ceiling, as some in the community have stated to me, where it's about bringing in new ideas and changing the way people think. So I've really based my career, especially when I look at my nonprofit boards, about focusing on communication. It's about getting that buy-in from the get-go and ensuring that everyone or your counterparts and with whom you're talking with also see the reason for what you're trying to say and why you're fighting so hard for it. So yes, it is having that persistence. It's also having the wherewithal to ensure that you can start to get that buy-in and create that critical mass so that you can create that change within everyone's perception. And that's why it's very important to have a seat at the table and to be part of the process.
Thanks. I love this question. Steve, we'll start with you. How does a lot of discussion in the election about small business. Here's a question about big business. How does your party plan to keep large corporations in BC if the government taxes them more? Big companies provide jobs to our well-educated children.
Well, thank you. The big business and, you know, when you look at taxes, is certainly about making sure that we have the right tax situation for not only big business, but for everyone in the province. But we also have to understand that we live in a connected global economy. The digital world has shifted everything. And so when I think about the fact that here we are in the 21st century, where a lot of decisions and the world has gotten a lot closer together, now it's not just about taxes, it's all about presumed risk. It's about stability, it's about having the right fundamentals in place so that these businesses don't just hit that switch and look to just suddenly move their operations. So it goes beyond just the taxes. It's also about having the right fundamentals and then the ability, and this is the human factor, of building those relationships with those big businesses so that they and the people that work with them are embedded in the fabric of our community so that they stay here for the long term. Thank you.
Selena?
I actually agree with Steve on that one, but I also think, well, it makes good sense, but I also think we need to enhance and renew our venture capital programs, and we need to make sure that those companies have the people here that they need to run their big businesses. So if you don't have the skilled workers, if you don't have an educated population to run that business, there's nothing here for you to operate with. So I think we still need to, again, come back to invest in, I think, our best resource, which is our people.
Thanks, Lynn. We'll start with you on this question from the floor. Do you support the Early Childhood Education Plan as presented by BC's Early Childhood Educators and the First Call Child Advocacy Coalition?
I think it's important that we invest in early learning and childcare through our Early Years Innovation Fund. And that we do need to make sure, again, it comes to, I guess overall, investing in our children. And so we know that the early years are important. And so making sure that they have access to the kinds of things that they need, whether it's proper nutrition, early learning opportunities, properly funded K-12, access to skills training and education, right through. We need to make sure that all of our children get what they need so that they can be the most productive citizens possible.
Steve?
Could you repeat the question?
Yep. Do you support the Early Childhood Education Plan as presented by BC's Early Childhood Educators and the First Call Child Advocacy Coalition? And perhaps if you're not familiar with that particular report, just your thoughts generally on the importance of early childhood education.
Well, early childhood education is definitely very important because we know learning is always a process, and right from the get-go, it has there's an impact from a very young age. When I look at our province and our government over the last little while, I do know that we invest $1 billion annually into early learning and childhood development services and supports. We've established 326 strong Start BC early learning programs and providing full-day kindergarten for 5-year-olds.
Thank you. Steve, we'll start with this one from the audience. According to your government or your party, could you prioritize government spending according to the following 3 categories: education, healthcare, and creation of new jobs? So between those 3 categories, what would be your priority?
Well, they're all very important. And so when you look at prioritization here, you do have to take it with a grain of salt because, again, these are all very important areas that compete for our funds and our attention. But I do know if I go into order, to me, it's about having the jobs so that we can continually create a stronger economy that reinvests in our programs such as healthcare and in education. So definitely creating jobs. When I look at education, it's also very important. It's something where we have to continually invest in and ensure that the future generations carry that torch for us moving forward. And then healthcare as well, because we do know that we do have an aging population, and also the fact that with that, there are going to be a lot more costs associated with that as well.
Thanks. Selena?
It almost feels like asking somebody to pick which of their 3 children is the favorite. And sometimes one child is the favorite, and other times another child is the favorite. So I'm actually not going to pick because I think they're all really vital to all of us at different points in our lives. So I'm not going to pick.
Fair enough. Okay. But I will ask you to answer this question.
Okay.
Because it's along the same kind of theme. Which of these projects do you support most? And you're supposed to choose one. Patello Bridge, Dees Island Tunnel, Light Rail in Surrey, SkyTrain, the Broadway to UBC connection. So these are those 4 transit projects.
Can you repeat them one more time?
Certainly can.
I need to see them.
So pick one. So you're allowed to pick one
Dees
project.
Island.
The Patello Bridge improvement,
Yeah.
the Dees Island Tunnel improvement,
Yeah.
Light Rail to Surrey, or the Broadway to UBC SkyTrain connection.
All right, so can I pick 2?
No. You could have if you'd answered the last question, but no.
So I prefer the transit-oriented ones, so I'm narrowing. I need to do that. I prefer the transit-oriented ones because I think actually we would get better bang for our buck in terms of longevity and in terms of greatest impact. So that means it's the light rail in Surrey or the Broadway connector. And I would need a bit more information, and I'll tell you what I'd be looking for. I'd be looking for who would it have the greatest impact for, how much. Like, I want to have some measurables, and I don't have those before me. So it's really hard because you need the data in order to make a sound decision, and I just don't have the data. I've heard different numbers being bandied around, and if you lived in Vancouver out by UBC, you got certain numbers, and if you live in Surrey and you listen to Diane Watts, you got other numbers. But I want to be able to compare apples to apples on this one. So I would want to take a look and also see what partnerships come to the table. So are there others who are interested in bringing some money to the table? Those decisions are always influenced by who's paying for it. Is there a private sector partner? Is there a federal government partner? And that helps to determine which project. So the best I could do is 2 out of the 4.
Steve?
Well, it's certainly one of those things where there are a lot more stakeholders involved. And certainly not only the residents and the businesses are in those areas, but also when you look at the levels of government that have to get involved. Because the question of mass transit and versus the ability to increase the roadways for infrastructure are always going to be there. So my only answer to that, because I think in some ways, and I agree that we have to find, we need more information, is that once we grow the economy, we have the Prosperity Fund, we can fund them all. So then we can have them all and ensure that we have a stronger province across the board.
Thank you. Steve, a question about healthcare for you. BC has the lowest number of nurses, that's LPNs, RPNs, RNs, and nurse practitioners per 100,000 population in all of Canada. Will your government commit to developing a nursing plan for BC and allow the participation of nurses in the development of this plan?
Well, from my own point of view, I think it's always important to have an inclusive nature and to have a discussion and a dialogue so that everyone's voices is heard. So when we're looking at the ability for us to bring more nurses, I think job one is to make sure that we have enough money to pay for them. And for us to pay for them all, again, it's coming for our ability to have the funds available, and we need that through new revenue sources. And until we have that ability, without looking to raise taxes and to increase that burden on us, not just now, but to future generations that will help to pay for it, then and only then can we have that discussion and make sure that all parties are satisfied.
Selena?
Well, with our commitment to expand home support and community care for seniors and people with disabilities and those with chronic and complex conditions, we're certainly going to need to make sure that we improve access to multidisciplinary teams that will include nurse practitioners. At this point, we need to understand a little bit more and certainly have dialogue with the stakeholders that includes nurses about, so how do we get there? How do we make sure that we have the resources that we need? How do we make sure that we have the skills training? Because this is a part of skills training, folks. Nurses are part of skills training. How do we make sure that we have enough to meet our future needs? And that's certainly part of our conversation around the NDP table.
Thanks. Now, so we'll start with you on this one. I'm going to ask this question personally from the podium here. One person who's not in the audience today is my 18-year-old son. Actually, I suspect I know who asked this one. It relates to community television and its role in connecting cities to residents. How would you enhance and support the role of community service? Steve? Or sorry, community television?
Well, I certainly am a big believer in community television. My background, although as a marketer, comes from the TV side of things. So TV production and also local broadcasting on a community level is always very important to me. I know that I used to work for a TV show where we had two guys on a farm talk about technology so that they can educate people on how to get involved in the digital world. And a lot of it came from the fact that with our distribution, at that point in time was on one of the local broadcasters, but when we didn't have those opportunities, we did look at community broadcasters as an option for us to get that message out. And when I think about the service that broadcasters provide, again, it certainly is important, and it's now one of those pieces of the puzzle that we have to work through, because to bring it up again with the digital side of things, content is more free now than it was in the past, so it does provide some new equations into how we can continually fund things and get it to the public, especially when you look at a lot of people now downloading and watching content for free. It's a reality, so we do have to find a way that we can continually promote and fund community broadcasting as well.
Selena?
Thank you. I have great appreciation for community broadcasting. You send my face out to residents every Monday night, and the number of people who actually say, I saw you on TV, and you saw me on TV, when was I on TV? It's like, well, no, it was the community TV. It's like, right. The number of people who monitor and watch their council is pretty impressive, and I think it's a fabulous asset to have in the community. But the thing that I want to point out that I learned about community TV is that it's also a great place for apprenticeships. It is where people learn that skill, that trade, so that they could move on to other things. So I think it's a critical component of our creative sector, and a valuable apprenticeship component as well.
Thank you. Next question relates to pharmaceuticals, and Selena, we'll start with you. In an effort to reduce costs for seniors, will you push for bulk purchase of generic and brand name drugs?
Sir, will I push for the purchase of bulk
purchase of generic and brand name drugs?
Well, I'm interested in keeping our costs down, so I think that's important to do. But we also need to make sure that we are that we have the information needed to make the best decisions, and that's what the therapeutic initiatives role is about. So I think that that's the guide that we use, and we're prepared to reinstate it to help make those decisions.
Thanks. Steve?
Yeah, anything that we can do to help alleviate the cost is always very important. We look at the case of pharmaceuticals.